Most people feel like they need to become better, more aware, more calm, more in control, like something is missing and needs to be fixed. There is a very common way we think about growth, awareness, and spirituality. We tend to assume it's a process of becoming more aware, more evolved, more present. We imagine ourselves moving upward, getting or gaining something over time, like building strength or learning a skill. And that feels natural because in most parts of life, growth works that way. We learn more, we gain experience, we become more capable. So it makes sense to assume that awareness itself must follow the same pattern. But if we pause and look closely at our actual experience, something subtle begins to shift. There are moments, quiet, ordinary moments, when everything feels clear. You're present. There is no effort. You aren't trying to understand anything. You are simply aware. And in those moments, nothing has been added. You haven't gained anything. You haven't built anything up. And yet, the experience feels more direct, more open, more real. Then there are other moments, very familiar ones, when the mind is busy. You're thinking, analyzing, remembering, planning. The system is active. But awareness often feels thinner, more distant, less connected to what's actually happening. So we begin to notice something. More thinking does not necessarily bring more awareness. More complexity does not necessarily bring more clarity. And that leads to a different way of understanding all of this. Awareness doesn't grow like something you accumulate. It's already here. What changes is how clearly it's expressed. And what shapes that expression is structure. Specifically, the structure created by physical intelligence. Physical intelligence makes the human experience possible. It gives us perception, memory, language, imagination, identity. It creates a rich, immersive world. It allows us to solve problems, plan ahead, make sense of life. But at the same time, it shapes how awareness moves. As the mind becomes more complex, experience becomes more structured, more detailed, more precise, but also more contained. Thought begins to loop. Perception feeds memory. Memory feeds prediction. Prediction reshapes perception. And awareness doesn't simply move through experience anymore. It begins to return to itself. And when that return becomes stable, something very familiar appears, a center, a sense of me. That's the human condition, not a flaw, not a mistake, but a system working extremely well. The loop holds awareness in place, and that stability creates identity. But it also creates something else. the feeling of being trapped. Trapped in thought, trapped in patterns, trapped in something that feels narrow, even when life itself is wide. Now, here's the shift. If awareness isn't something we gain, what is actually happening when we feel more open, more present, more at ease? The answer is simple. Less is in the way. Awareness isn't increasing. Constraint isn't decreasing. This changes everything. We assume more intelligence leads to more awareness. But what we actually discover is that more structure can limit how awareness is expressed. At simpler levels, experience is immediate, less filtered, less interpreted. At more complex levels, experience becomes layered with thought, not less awareness, just more structure around it. So what looks like growth is often just a change in how tightly awareness is held. This reframes the whole idea of growth. It's not about becoming more. It's about releasing. When we talk about presence or letting go or selflessness, we're not adding anything. We're loosening the structure that keeps awareness tightly bound. Selflessness isn't about being better. It's structural. It reduces the pull back to the center. It allows awareness to move more freely instead of returning again and again to the same place. This is why the idea of remembering matters. Not remembering the past, but recognizing what has always been there. When the layers soften, what remains is simple awareness, not something new, but something revealed. In this view, no one is more or less in any absolute sense. The differences we see are differences in structure, not differences in consciousness itself. Each life exists within a kind of window, a way awareness is shaped by a particular level of complexity. And the human experience sits at a very specific point where the loop becomes continuous, stable, self-sustaining. That gives us everything we experience as human: depth, meaning, identity, but also confinement. And beyond that point, more complexity doesn't deepen awareness. It begins to fragment the system. So the limit isn't failure, it's structure. And at that point, change no longer comes from adding more. It comes from releasing, not by removing intelligence, but by shifting how it is used. From a self-centered loop to a more open flow. And when that holding fully softens, something fundamental changes. Awareness doesn't move upward. It doesn't go anywhere. It simply stops being held. So the movement isn't about becoming more. It's about seeing more clearly. Seeing that what feels like limitation is structure. And what we call freedom is the release of that structure. So the question changes. It's no longer how do I become more? It becomes what can be released right now. So awareness isn't held so tightly because nothing essential is missing. Nothing needs to be added. What we're looking for is already here. And when that holding softens, What remains isn't something we achieve, it's something we recognize. And that recognition doesn't feel like something new. It feels like coming home to something that we never lost.